Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing another 8 That Are Great, and this time we're talking about non-fiction books that I do not give enough love and attention to on my channel. So I did one recently that was just called Books I Don't Talk About Enough, and I covered a bunch of fiction books that I think are really great but I don't often seem to mention or end up recommending on my channel. And today I kind of mentioned in that video, like, if you wanted to see a non-fiction one, let me know in the comments down below. Everyone was like, clearly we want to see a non-fiction one, why are you even asking? Go get on it, come on. So that is what this video is today. Some of these will definitely have been mentioned more on my channel than the fiction ones, just because I have read fewer non-fiction in my life, which means I tend to recommend it more frequently just because the number of books I am picking from when I talk about a recommendations video is smaller. However, some of these are from my pre-channel days, so the chance of you hearing about them is potentially less. Some of them had a lot of hype that's now died down and I just want to bring them back into the spotlight. The first one I have to talk about is Seashaken Houses by Nancollas. This is the history of the Rock Lighthouse from Eddystone to Fastnet, and it is, I think, 10 different individual lighthouses. So a rock lighthouse is one that, as its name kind of suggests, is actually out at sea on a rock, not on the land. So when you live on it, you're entirely cut off from the mainland. You're entirely at the whims of the ocean, and getting supplies can be very difficult. It is really dependent on the weather, and it is about the process of building these various lighthouses, and also a little bit about the people who lived on them, and also about Tom's kind of journey finding out about them. This book I found is a little slow and repetitive in places, so whilst the first few sort of chapters focusing on these different lighthouses are very interesting, you will see some of the same themes and information repeated, just because there weren't that many changes as to how you build a lighthouse really over the years. So I would actually recommend treating it almost like it's a collection of essays that you kind of dip in and out of, so that you don't end up with a little bit of kind of fatigue from seeing the same information. That information, however, is really interesting, and it's a lovely look at how important the lighthouse was for British economy, and also how interesting it can be in advances both in sort of physics and understandings of how to put architecture together, and also about kind of architectural and building sort of advancements with technology and things like that. Really beautiful, and some lovely descriptions of the ocean, which you'd kind of expect. So it's a fun one if you're potentially into a little bit of nature writing but want a little bit more history with your nature, shall we say. The next one I have to talk about I read a really long time ago now, and that is The Purity Myth by Jessica Valenti. This is looking at America's obsession with virginity and how it's hurting young women. Now, this book was published a little while ago, I believe. I will double check exactly when. So this was published in 2010, so it will be a little bit out of date when it comes to some of the statistics, and some of the practices may no longer be happening, but it's looking at the kind of various ways that America, but probably kind of Western culture in general, puts a lot of emphasis on women remaining virgins, and what does that mean in terms of misogyny, feminism, and like the kind of commodification of sex in general, especially when it comes to young girls. So it's talking about, you know, the act of giving away a woman at her wedding. There are all sorts of sort of traditions in some American cultures and communities of like pledging, a daughter pledging herself to her father until she's married. It also does talk about kind of the prevalence of anal sex within young women who have said that they're going to reserve their virginity for marriage, and kind of some of the dangers that can come with equating a certain moral judgment with a specific sexual act that doesn't consider the range of different sexual acts available. I read it, like I said, a while ago, but it was very interesting and really informed a lot of the stuff I was doing at the time at uni about feminism. So yeah, really fascinating and definitely worth a read. The next one I want to talk about was fairly popular towards the beginning of the year, but I've not heard anybody mention it since, and I had a bit of a mixed reaction to it, but I think it's interesting enough that it's worth a read, and that is Savage Appetites by Rachel Monroe. This is looking at the true crime industry and the huge boom it's had over the past kind of couple of decades, and the absolute fascination women seem to tend to have with true crime, and it breaks down the different ways that people can interact with true crime into kind of 4 different archetypes. So are you interested in the detective, the victim, the murderer, or the defender? That was the last one. Now, I had a few mixed feelings about it, because I do believe that Rachel Monroe is a little bit too close to the true crime kind of fanaticism to really remain objective to it in all the ways, and she kind of ends up falling into some of the same tropes and problems that she is criticizing the industry of doing as a whole. But in terms of discussing what is it that we are so fascinated about when it comes to true crime, why do we why are people so interested in it? I definitely found it really interesting, and it's that kind of meta-analysis that definitely appeals to me, and I think would probably appeal to quite a few people who watch my channel. I personally found the detective section of it the most interesting, which was the first bit, because it was looking at a woman who she really helped the FBI when it came to crime scene analysis, because she made these tiny little crime scene doll houses, and she used them to kind of help teach the FBI detectives of like how to analyze the scene and work out what had happened. She kind of put together these little scenarios. Very, very fascinating. Also, the detective section is the very few bits of true crime that I can really get behind. I like the idea of the puzzle solving. I like a lot of the forensic science that there is, but when it then gets later on and we're sort of talking about like killers' motives and identifying with victims and things like that, that's when I get a little bit creeped out and grossed out by true crime, and I take a bit of a step back. So a mixed response to this book, but one that if you are a true crime fanatic, you have to read, because it's just so fascinating as a meta kind of macro look at the whole industry. And I'm really hoping that more people will write in this area off the back of something like this. We're kicking it old school again and talking about a book that was super hyped probably like 15 years ago now, and that is Yes Ma'am by Dani Wallace. This is a fun book, and I think that more people should definitely end up reading it. It is about a guy who tries to say yes to everything for an entire year, and it's looking at kind of, he ends up very closed off at the beginning of the book, and that's what he decided to try and do this sort of wacky experiment for. And it's about kind of taking chances and leaps of faith and being willing to kind of seek adventure wherever you can. It's silly and zany and really good fun, and just sort of like a fast-paced non-fiction book that I think is just more about people and life rather than like factual information, and would be really entertaining as a read. There is a movie based on it, which is it's okay. The movie is not even vaguely close to what actually happens, and Dani Wallace has a whole series of books like this. He like accidentally started a cult at one point. Him and his mate tried to find all the people named Dave Gorman, something like that, who was also his name. He's just generally quite a fun guy. He does weird stuff with his life, and it's entertaining to read. Looping back round to some feminist text, we also have The Living Dolls by Natasha Walters, I believe. And this again is looking at the kind of hyper-sexualization of feminism. It was written in 2008, and there was a real kind of wave around that time of reclaiming, women reclaiming their bodies, but then in doing so, this kind of act of reclamation being taken and commodified by various sort of businesses as being something which, you know, like pretending to almost be like hyper woke, and this idea that like you therefore had to be sort of very slutty and sort of putting yourself on show, and if you weren't, then you were being held down by the patriarchy. And it was kind of a different style of forcing women into one particular box, rather than trying to open up the conversation to be about choice and not judging people regardless of what they pick. So this is a book that was looking at exactly how that kind of happened, and the way that businesses and media kind of took advantage of this as a way of twisting what was supposed to be an underlying good message. I have read this one quite a while ago as well. I read it around sometimes the purity myth, so some of the information in it, any of the statistics are clearly going to be out of date. Feminism and sort of our understandings of the patriarchy have definitely changed quite a lot since then, but I do think as a snapshot of what was happening in the early 2000s, it's really fascinating, and there's still going to be very relevant discussions for today. A more up-to-date title focused around kind of feminism and the patriarchy is No Visible Bruises by Louise Snyder. This is looking specifically at domestic abuse, and it does tend to focus it on domestic abuse where the woman is the victim and the man is the perpetrator, because that is the most common form, although it does acknowledge in the introduction that other forms do exist. However, they will all be benefited from the kind of general discussion that she's having in the book. This was actually up for the BookTube prize, and I believe it did quite well. I think it got through quite a few of the rounds, and I can totally see why. One thing I deeply appreciated about the book is one of the middle sections of it is focused on what work can be done with men to stop them from abusing women, rather than what work can be done to give women an outlet. Because fundamentally, if you're not addressing the underlying root, all you're doing is removing one woman from a situation to then allow another woman to slot into that, and it's not fixing the root cause of the problem, it's just dealing with the symptoms. Naturally, you do need to deal with the symptoms as well, because otherwise there are going to be women in jeopardy, but if we don't treat that underlying cause and really look at kind of what is driving men to be violent, and how can kind of emotions be dealt with that mean that things don't escalate this far, and sort of what is that culture of toxic masculinity that results in these dangerous situations in the first place. It's a really harrowing read, as you would expect, but it's jam-packed full of information and statistics. It was an incredible read, and I really enjoyed it. Enjoyed is the wrong word. Greatly appreciated its existence and found it very informative and eye-opening at the time of reading. On a much more light-hearted one, but still kind of talking about women and patriarchy and feminism and all that jazz, is How to Be a Woman by Caitlin Moran. Caitlin Moran is a like columnist for, I believe, The Times. I could be wrong about that, but she sort of is kind of an opinion piece. She's written about music quite a lot as well, and it's a blend of a memoir of her childhood and also growing up and kind of like her time in early music writing and early journalism, as well as a conversation about like what does it mean to be a woman in her life, and like how does she feel about various kind of issues that women face. She's actually released a more up-to-date one recently that I haven't read, but I've heard it has been very well received. I've seen like little snippets of it on Twitter. It looks very funny. She has kind of a slightly aggressive, bold, in-your-face style. There are a lot of sections of it that are in full capital letters the entire time, which was a little grating to read, and she has a very specific style of humour, and I don't know how well it would hold up today because it was written, I think, 10 years ago. Now, a lot of these are ones that I'm recommending from like back catalogue, which is why sometimes the reviews are a little bit like, I don't know what that's like now to read, but good fun, and I remember really giggling a lot at the time, so worth checking out. And then the final one I have to recommend is The Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson, and this is a linguistics book looking at just how absurd the English language is and tracking the various iterations that it's had, the different influences over the time, and just how, yeah, weird our language is. It's a terrible one to try and learn. I don't know why it's the main one that we go for, but yeah, all the different rules and kind of the various bits that it's stolen from other languages, which is really fascinating in general. And Bill Bryson is kind of a classic, iconic non-fiction writer, but I don't think this one in particular gets much love, and it should definitely get more attention because I really enjoyed it. I've not read anything else from him, but I really enjoyed this one. So that is it from me. Those are 8 non-fiction books that I don't talk about very often on my channel. Some of them because I read them so long ago that I don't feel like I can talk very meaningfully about them, but I've done it now on camera anyway, so I hope some of these have been added to your TBR, or some of them were at least very new to you, or have reminded you of books that existed that might have fallen out of your radar because they've just been around for so long. So let me know what you think about this in the comments down below, and if there are any other videos that you would particularly like to see from me, do let me know, because I do listen to you guys and I do like to respond to comments and try and get content out that you're interested in. So have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!